In the time I had to test Ghost Recon Breakpoint, there's a lot to love about the technology behind it. But for every visual feature, every detail that makes its world come to life, there's also another point that breaks the illusion. So to start, as a sequel to Wildlands, developer Ubisoft Paris guns for a very big idea here. The team creates a huge canvas for 4-player tactical shooting, acres of wilderness to explore. In a way echoing the likes of Far Cry or Crysis, there's a massive island to travel, a playground if you will for stealthy missions or all-out explosive gunfights. The way that plays out on console, in particular the top-end spec machines like PS4 Pro and Xbox One X in focus today, is fascinating. So what are we dealing with here engine-wise? Well, it's Anvil Next 2.0, famously showcased through the Assassin's Creed series. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking it was something else entirely though. Not just aesthetically but also mechanically, the way Breakpoint plays pushes the engine in an entirely different way. It's an engine repurposed, but there are a swathe of additional technologies added to it, just as with Wildlands, to make it work for third-person shooting and deliver an authentic looking world. A quick word on what we're looking at in image quality before we get to the heart of it. We have PS4 Pro and Xbox One X in the headlights here. The reason? Well, there are two modes on each to consider before you play, for graphics and resolution. Now by default it's switched to the graphics mode, and in a nutshell, this drops the pixel count on both machines to enable higher end visuals. Notably, you're getting more precise ambient occlusion. There are potentially other points, but this is by far the most computationally taxing and obvious change. See in this shot, the resolution mode on Xbox One X produces an inaccurate halo of shade around everything, trees, bushes, and so on. It's nothing that'd stand out on its own, but by comparison, the graphics mode gives a more refined look that hones the shade more tightly to each object. The trade-off for better AO comes by way of dropped resolution though. In graphics mode on Xbox One X, I found numbers in the region of 1080p, specifically just above it at 1920 by 1152. There's a likelihood of dynamic resolution here, but that's often the ballpark number I've found, and it's quite a cut down. Next to the resolution mode on X, which renders at around 3840 by 1800, it's a very big difference in image clarity. Potentially there are drops under this number too. I personally do prefer playing in the latter mode, the resolution mode, since it looks so visibly sharper, but at least the option is there. Worth noting, both modes also run with a 30 FPS cap plus adaptive VSync. So in other words, no scope for a performance mode or 60 FPS playback, which is a shame. PS4 Pro next. This one works in much the same way, except the pixel counts are adjusted to suit. In resolution mode you get 2560 by 1440, though the lowest value I've caught is 2304 by 1296, but typically 1440p. The graphics mode meanwhile follows the same logic as Xbox One X. You get better ambient occlusion, but resolution drops to 1920 by 1080 or thereabouts. It's 30 frames per second all round again, though I will say the resolution mode did show more signs of dropping. Expect a lot more screen tear with that high-res mode selected on PS4 Pro. In terms of comparisons between the consoles, well, surprisingly there's not too much to divide X and Pro besides pixel counts. I've tried this both ways, once comparing the resolution mode on each, and then graphics, and as you can see the texture work, lighting, shadows and all the rest are basically identical. Now, I did notice some minor discrepancies in foliage LODs, but it could easily be a matter of randomized terrain. For all intents and purposes though, you're getting the same visual results both sides. It's just a matter of whether you can deal with the added screen tearing on PS4 Pro when running the resolution mode. Regardless of console, there are serious pluses and minuses to Ghost Recon Breakpoint on an engine level. The positives first. Of course, we're not getting the high NPC counts or parkour climbing of Assassin's Creed, but what we do get in its place is very impressive. The terrain simulation is easily my favourite part of the package. Right away you'll catch foliage swaying on the distance, swinging in the front of low dusk lighting in a dramatic opener. It plays right into the game's more covert missions, with your custom character creeping through tall grass, cueing it to bend and sway around your body. It's a distinctive feature, especially in the face of so many games with static foliage. Far Cry is still a big culprit of this I think, and Breakpoint truly shows how much it adds to the scene to have it dynamic. It goes one further. Okay, more talk on plants because I love this effect, but there's even a form of wind simulation, energizing a grass patch with proper physics-based movement. Combine that with the sheer density of all the plants as they spread to the distance without much popping at all, even while driving, it creates an eerily realistic effect. The surface of each grass blade even gets the luxury of high quality shading. These are well designed materials, and each blade gets impacted by oncoming light, producing a slick, dewy effect. It's utterly brilliant. There are other details too, parts of the technical design which makes Ghost Recon's world feel alive. Object physics allow most items to react to gunfire, and again it gives this sense the world is tangible. Likewise, we have weather and dynamic time of day, plus wildlife scattered across the woodland. Above all else though, it's the deformable sand and mud that really sticks out. It leaves a detailed mark on the world as you step or crawl through the dirt, making a precise trail of your movement. Honestly, I had a lot of fun just playing with this. Just like the swaying foliage, you can use it as a stealth tactic, covering yourself while prone if you need to. The details of those marks have a similar effect to parallax occlusion mapping, only here it's generated in real time by the player's impact on the world. Again, it's something we just don't see in most games, let alone other Anvil Next 2.0 titles. For every positive point, there's an aspect of Breakpoint that drags it back. Call it the uncanny valley effect, but the push for a realistic setting with great foliage, mud physics and draw distance only makes the shortcomings more obvious. Take the body animations as an example here. There's a form of inverse kinematics to adapt for leg positions on the player. It adjusts to different inclines, which is great. You even have a very fluid dynamic turning animation while aiming from the ground. And yet, it doesn't always look quite right. The wrist position here looks a little strange as you turn around, to nitpick a little bit. And certainly the running animation can look a little repetitive and unnatural. In the face of such a realistic world, this looks like a scripted video game running animation. Add cases of clipping with geometry, and the illusion does sadly start to break as you play further into the game. The issues don't end there. To round up a few, we've got texturing, which is pretty shocking in spots. Even going with the Xbox One X as the best case there are too many assets which look obviously subpar, and it's a shame. The material work in woodlands and the mud are so convincing, but to then face these blocky texture maps is a bit of a come down. Also a disappointment is the obvious banding on the camera motion, a kind of temporal blur that streaks across the image as you play. Again, it detracts from the overall look of the game. Added to that, cube map reflections are used in the game in places, notably windows, which much like Watch Dogs creates an unusual effect. Often you'll be looking into a mirror and see a reflection that has nothing to do with the scene. All combined, it's not a great look. There are other issues, like in this early crash cutscene, alpha transparencies are visibly low res on flames, and even textures continuously pop in across character faces as the scene cuts to and from. Nitpicks they are, but after a while it does stack up to a point where the game's merits start to become overshadowed by these bizarre asides. In this sense, performance is another bugbear that needs highlighting. Xbox One X, for the most part, and based on an early sample, plays out reasonably well at a 30 FPS cap in solo play. The issues do start to crop up in busier areas, especially the hub. Here's an example in resolution mode. Some drops into the high 20 FPS region with that adaptive VSync kicking in too. And likewise, if we shift to the graphics mode, it's not wildly improved there either. It suggests there's a CPU contention here more than a GPU one, given the goalposts are moved quite a bit here in terms of resolution on both sides. Outside of the hub world though, it's surprisingly robust on X. There is potential for drops, and especially once you invoke ally players, but so far Xbox One X is the more dependable of the two enhanced consoles. Where we do see a challenge is on PS4 Pro. Performance here struggles outside quite notably. In thick dense woodlands you'll see plenty of tearing, and it does impact on the general look of the game. Driving quickly across the landscape will especially kick it off, and mostly in that resolution mode. 1440p it seems is a stretch too far, and moving to the graphics mode helps somewhat by pushing it down to 1080p. As a quick sample of what Ghost Recon Breakpoint offers, it's a frustrating mixture of traits. The foliage physics and world interaction with weather, vehicles and that amazing mud are spot on, and I want to see more of these elements in future games. In a way, it feels like an augmented Far Cry. Bolt on the multiplayer and it's really got a lot going for it. The shooting mechanics though are a frustration. Often you'll fire a bullet on a foreground object, despite your aiming reticle being over something far away. But all of that pales in comparison to the rough edges we've seen elsewhere, in character animation, the textures and the way so many of its visual features appear. Breakpoint is a game with a ripe concept, and it's a shame its visuals don't quite tie together perfectly. Still, for fans of rendering technologies, it might be worth a look, just to see a few ideas that could wind up becoming more popular in the future. Just don't expect the execution here to be perfect all round. That's all for today though. If you did like this quick look, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get a pristine quality version of this video, feel free to check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch with me or the team directly, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.